Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining today's webinar on safety and security considerations for outdoor services and gatherings, hosted by the Secure Community Network. My name is Dina Weiss. I serve as the Chief of Staff. Want to thank everyone for being with us today, especially our panel of experts and partners who will be covering this topic. Couple of housekeeping notes on the webinar. As this is a webinar, all of our attendees are muted and will not have video, but please drop any questions into the Q&A or the chat function, and we'll work to address as many as we can in the time allotted. With this, we'll also be recording, so this will be made available to all registrants after, along with related resources and materials. I will turn the webinar over now to SCN Principal Deputy Director and COO Patrick Daly.
Thank you, Dina, and appreciate again all the panelists and participants today. This is obviously ongoing SCN High Holiday Safety and Security Preparedness webinar series, and want to thank each of you for participating not only in today's webinar, but also in past and future ones as well. This four-part series of webinars, co-sponsored by the Jewish Federations in North America and the Conference of Presidents, was really specifically thought about and informed by conversations with many of our stakeholders this year, recognizing the dynamic, unique, and unprecedented environment that we're working within as a result of the ongoing pandemic. Each webinar, as presented, is also accompanied by specific and topical resource material that was developed and produced by the SCN team, but really in collaboration with that same myriad group of security directors and national partners to really produce products that are informed by our stakeholders and partners and work to support their efforts every day. I'll provide a brief overview of that document related to this specific topic today prior to its distribution following the webinar. Today's webinar is the third in the series and will focus on the challenges, considerations, and recommendations for hosting outdoor events and services and gatherings safely and securely. We're joined today by an expert group of presenters and panelists who will share their expertise, experience, and observations today and provide an opportunity for participant questions as well. I'll introduce the presenters and panelists in a moment. However, I want to take a few minutes to preview and discuss the High Holiday Outdoor Services Safety and Security Checklist, which will be shared after today's call. Again, I'd like to thank my colleagues and partners who contributed to this resource. It was truly a collaborative effort, and I think made stronger by that expertise and experience contributing to this document. A couple notes at the outset. Obviously, as it relates to safety and security, this list was developed. It is not meant to be comprehensive beyond that, as it relates to a lot of other event management and logistics that I know many of you are involved in on a day-to-day basis as we're thinking about planning for the high holidays in a unique environment, and today focusing specifically on outdoor events. So we really broke this into something that is digestible, two-pager. There's a snapshot there. I don't expect you to read it. That'll go out in its entirety after today's call. Really, we looked at this in 10 broad buckets and called them top 10 security considerations to be thinking about as we launch in this planning cycle in advance of Rosh Hashanah and through the end of the high holidays this year. Looking first and foremost at that pre-event planning. Now, many of you do this on an ongoing basis for traditional indoor events and special events, and a lot of that planning and component is not that dissimilar. We have factored in a lot of outdoor special event considerations that the panel will address and talk about as we move through. So really starting with convening that safety and security committee, not different to what congregations usually have in an operational environment, but really ensuring that group is tasked with a security coordinator running point and informing those decisions and working through that plan at the outset. Completing a special event risk assessment at the outset, working collaboratively with law enforcement to determine if there's any unique or specific risks. Many of our congregations that are urban environments are finding themselves dealing with civil disruption, protests, and other events that could potentially impact future planning, and events should be thought about when thinking through hosting outdoor events, both in location and as it informs security. Developing an emergency operations plan that takes a lot of those considerations into play, whether it's traditional medical emergencies to civil unrest or, God forbid, an active threat scenario. We need to be thinking about how we're deploying those same training and same objectives and same knowledge that we've learned through active threat training and others in an environment that is less secure just by function of location. Establishing a communications plan for all coordinating safety and security activities during the event. Coordination, number two, coordination with law enforcement. Providing law enforcement at the outset, regardless regardless of their level of deployment as added security in the event, but just ensuring within their area of operations, they understand what events are occurring. Could be dozens, it could be a few, and really understanding start and ends to the event, understanding what the event will entail, when people are coming, when people are leaving, and really understanding what that emergency operations plan and what that team is doing as part of the safety and security plan is critical in coordinating that pre-event, working with our law enforcement partners. Thinking through having law enforcement or security partners walk through the event space and provide some additional guidance and counsel as it relates to safety and security is paramount at the outset in planning with law enforcement. And then as we think about the security posture, and we'll talk about this a little bit in safety and security staff, what level of hiring off-duty police officers or law enforcement is appropriate based on size of event, risk environment, or anything else that was informed through that initial threat assessment at the outset of your planning process. Moving to safety and security staff, providing and hiring security personnel and really adjusting that staffing level based on the size of the event and some of those other considerations that may be contiguous to the event or may pop up unknown to your event. Utilizing existing volunteer staff as part of a greeter usher program can also assist in emergencies. As long as we have the appropriate training in place, and we do this with our greeter usher programs, having that team focus on the safety and security issues, whether it's escorting people in or out in an emergency, knowing how to respond in a medical event, and directing law enforcement or first responder response is an important part of that comprehensive plan as well. And then ensuring to that point, everybody understands their safety and security role as part of the bigger picture and the bigger team, and really understands how that emergency operations plan was designed, and what their role is, that not just as an individual, but in collective coordination as well. Thinking through communications and outreach, and it's really on two levels. It's one, in advance of the event, how we're communicating to congregants, to visitors, to guests, what to expect, not just as it relates to safety and security, but also COVID-19 considerations, which we'll address separately. But ensuring that's communicated in advance so they know what to expect when they're coming, leaving time for screening and other measures that may need to be in place this year that were not in previous years is important to think about and consider. And then having that plan to ensure clear communication during the event, whether it's between safety and security personnel, other event staff, to ensure a smooth event, and if communications need to be made on an ongoing basis, and particularly in a crisis situation, that plan is in place. Thinking through perimeter control, and I know our security expert panel will talk about this in detail as we talk about the nuts and bolts of the event, is much more difficult than it suggests, of course. Being in an environment that has nebulous or undefined perimeters, and really trying to set and determine those physical areas of command and control directly informs access control. We'll talk about that in a minute. So ensuring that we can, to our best of our ability, set up and identify perimeters, both for law enforcement, enforcement of crowd control, but also so that we understand that we can be allowing people in a smooth and effective way, and securing that perimeter as best we can in an outdoor environment, is critically important. Moving specifically to access control within that layer of security and perimeter control, ensuring that we keep access control and access points well identified, particularly as we're thinking about ingress and egress, but also ensuring that they're appropriately staffed with event personnel, safety personnel, and security personnel as required, so that we can have smooth flow in and smooth flow out for normal course of action, but also if we need to evacuate an emergency, we're able to do that as best we can. Really thinking through the screening of visitors, what that's going to look like. Are people required to have passes, identification in advance? Are we introducing additional levels of screening in place? Who's doing that screening? All things that we need to consider, whether it relates to event staff and security personnel in place. And then lastly, as it relates to screening, ensuring that we're prepared to not deny entry to those that are not adhering to our policies for identification, and who has the authority to make that decision, and which staff and personnel are going to actually enforce that component. Mitigation response and reporting procedures. This is really important, thinking through how we're responding during the event. As I mentioned, having that EOP in place, but also with our safety and security staff around perimeters, around access, if they're seeing things, who they need to report to and what that reporting looks like, both internally if an announcement needs to be made, but also externally if we're reporting to law enforcement or security personnel that are either standing by or going to be operating in some response capacity. We'll touch base briefly on COVID-19 considerations, and I know the panel will address this a little bit as we move into the presentation. But obviously, it goes without saying that anything being done outdoors, whether it's in a tent environment, a drive-through environment, or any other kind of component, ensure local regulations and state regulations are still in place, whether it is in terms of the number of guests, social distancing, mask requirements, and other considerations. And again, ensuring that event entrance and those screening procedures don't compromise COVID-19 best practices. But at the same time, as we're thinking through the prioritization of safety and security, we've had a lot of questions come up on past webinars, and I think it's really important to understand that in a crisis or emergency situation, life safety comes before some of those other considerations. So we need to be thinking about that, who's making that decision, how that's coming into play, because obviously in an active threat event, we're going to be less concerned about social distancing and masks than getting people to safety. And then lastly, because we're launching into the beginning of the high holidays with Rosh Hashanah, this is really an opportunity to test this plan in an environment that may change. So looking through whether or not we had an incident, something that didn't work well, something that did work well, something that we didn't think of that we want to refine and look at that plan. It does not need to be a formal after action, but really a discussion, looking at lessons learned, or anything we might tweak and change into our plan, going into additional events and get-togethers. I think is an important opportunity for us to do that. So want to move into our presentation and then panelists right after. So I'd like to take the opportunity to introduce Rabbi Posey, National Director of Synagogue and Community Services with the Orthodox Union. The OU has been a longtime friend and partner of SCN and appreciate your expertise today, Rabbi. In his capacity as serving as National Director, Rabbi Posey oversees the Orthodox Union's work with over 1,000 synagogues nationwide, as well as communities and day schools throughout North America to enhance Orthodox Jewish life. Prior to the panel discussion today, Rabbi Posey will share some of his observations and expertise and really perspectives on how OU congregations are preparing for the holidays in this unique environment, as well as the acute challenges and solutions shuls are encountering in the process. Rabbi Posey.
Thank you so much. And again, I want to echo probably what I believe is the view of not only the congregations that I represent or work with, but frankly, everyone who's on this webinar and has joined all the different things. That just thank you so much for all of the work that you guys have been doing tirelessly, both convening important experts and also creating resources that are dealing with this absolutely essential topic. I want to just thank many of the folks that I know personally that I see here on the guest list, including some of our national organizational partners, as well as I see some synagogue staff from Washington and Connecticut and a bunch of other places. So it's great to see everyone in virtually to the extent we can. I also just want to thank all the other panelists who are coming to share their expertise. I wanted to just present my very short remarks in two different formats. The first is, or two different parts. Challenges and solutions. The challenges, especially as we're seeing them in conversations we're having with Orthodox communities that in a certain regard make us similar but sometimes unique in the considerations we're thinking of when it comes to security, especially when it comes to outdoor locations. Specifically within the Orthodox community, we have the factor that we take into when we are on the high holidays themselves, that we don't use technology, not using electricity, not using some of those technology tools in a broader way that we might be able to do during the weekday. And that keeps us on our toes, because we also have, when we're in an outdoor location, the consideration that deals with in terms of the sound and the ability we have to communicate with a larger group of people who are coming to our congregations. And we need to make sure that we keep that in mind when we plan for the security aspect. We have the reality that I'm sure many congregations are facing, which is because of COVID-19, we're not only outdoors, but we're also outdoors in places that are not ideal, both from a security standpoint and from a capacity standpoint. We have, places that may have a parking lot or a adjacent garden or a kid's playground that is now being converted to a sanctuary space that will be able to accommodate folks in places like California where it's illegal to pray indoors, or other places where they just need to expand their capacity in terms of outdoor locations. And that leads to a couple of different things when we have so much less capacity, when our demand could still be hundreds of people going to a given congregation. Number one, it's just being creative about expanding the type of space you can use. And what we're seeing very, very commonly, and I see there's a couple of points on the chat for this, is using multiple satellite locations that may include private and very often backyard or individual family spaces. And that often creates a challenge both from a security standpoint and a logistics standpoint of how you coordinate being a cohesive security plan that you want for your congregation when your congregation is taking place or meeting in so many different locations. Weather is a big deal. It's not just something that, it's something that everyone needs to deal with, both because of heat, participation, and cold, but it also impacts when you're trying to plan for security, trying to think about how the weather may impact your ability to implement your security plan. That's going to often cause a wrinkle, so to speak, in what you're planning to do when you also need to communicate with people in sometimes extreme weather conditions when you're outdoors. One of the most common things that's been mentioned before, and I'm sure it's going to be mentioned many times, is that when you're outdoors, you're open to multiple directions, multiple sides. Your east, now, south, north, and west are open. And that's a significant security consideration where you are subject to a variety of different challenges, most commonly security, where you have four walls. When you have four walls around you, so people can't see, people can't shoot in, people can't infiltrate, and now you don't have that luxury. But also something to be aware of from a security standpoint is the noise that can mask a variety of different security threats, and the noise that can also make your own prayers and communication with your members more difficult. Information security, especially when you're spread out to a variety of different locations, there is also, a double-edged sword in that you are a soft target by definition as a synagogue, because people know who you are and where you are, and often where you're meeting. When you're expanding to an outdoor location, that the information becomes that much more important to make sure that we safeguard in an appropriate way and be careful how we message that out. And especially when you're dealing with satellite locations or private locations, knowing where we are, when we are, and making sure that that information is in the right hands and not in the wrong hands. And again, just to reiterate, the sound issues are very significant when you are trying to be outdoors and don't have the control over how communication is going between you and your congregant. So those are some of the issues, the challenges that we face. There are many others, but those are the ones that I wanted to just address briefly, what we're hearing from our congregation. In terms of the solutions that we are, again, hearing and recommending and seeing from many of our partners, including the Rabbinical Council of America and a variety of other denominations that we're in close contact with, is the key point that was already mentioned in the introduction, which is law enforcement connection. And I want to just mention three parts of that. What we are recommending and seeing done is that folks are meeting with their local law enforcement all the way down to the local police captains, describing the unique layout of where we are, how we are, and the unique security threat that is presented because of our openness to outdoor threats. One common thing that we're seeing as an important best practice is every location having a designated law enforcement liaison. So we, as a larger, let's say, board, when we're planning for the security of our high holidays, will connect with police captain, but will also tell each satellite location, which may be smaller and more self-contained, here, this individual is going to be the law enforcement liaison. When an interaction may be necessary, this person's already designated, they're going to be able to have the information they need to offer and be able to be the communicating liaison. Really important to know who and where places of worship are, and keeping careful about, if you have now, instead of one location in your synagogue, but a bunch of different private locations that are outdoor, knowing if that information is going to be in the public eye, is going to be on social media, being careful when you share the information about where each of your members are going to be, knowing that you perhaps share that with law enforcement, but make sure that that doesn't get out everywhere so that people are limiting the threat that may come from a publicly known private location. One practical thing that we've seen that has had good impact both on the COVID-19 and sound issue for our operations, but also security standpoint, is what we call an acoustic shell. You can rent them from all sorts of theater companies and the like, which is a large, usually made out of wood, somewhat sort of a movable wall, which allows, without the use of a microphone, which many of our congregations said don't use on the high holidays, the sounds to be sort of bounced off and be able to be heard in a much larger capacity. But what an acoustic shell often allows you to do is create a significant barrier to some open ingress or egress locations so that you're blocked from view from some of these other types of locations. The other two real points that we're using to try and manage some of the issues that we mentioned are making sure you have very clear communication in advance. And that means very strict pre-registration about who's coming, and that's from COVID-19, but also security standpoint, and communication in advance about the things people should be aware of, the security precautions they should take, and that everybody knows that well in advance so that they are coming with a clear set of knowledge of what it means to be in a secure environment when you're outdoors. And the last point is just making sure that whether you have paid security or volunteer security with some of, again, many partners that work to train members in securing their locations, is to have in mind all of the different sides of your locations and figuring out what you're going to be able to do, whether it's putting personal, security barriers or physical space that you can do to block view from the outside to make sure that you're making, from a safety standpoint, your outdoor location as close to indoor as safe as possible. So just those are the quick points of, again, what we're seeing in terms of challenges, some of the solutions. Many of them really dovetail and actually come from what SDN has shared, and so we can share our gratitude and probably be expanded upon by many of the panelists up until now. And again, we really thank you for allowing us to be part of this and support the community in the way you are.
Thank you, Rabbi Posey, for sharing your thoughts and all the work that OU's been doing, both now but in the future with your congregations. I want to turn and introduce our panel of experts today who collectively possess over 100 years of security, military, defense, and other related expertise. And again, thank you for representing your communities, but being part of the broader network. I'll just run through quick intros at the outset, and then we'll begin the questions to launch in the panel and ensure we move through the Q&A as well. First, I want to introduce Oren Baratz, serves as Senior Vice President, External Affairs for the Jewish Federation of Cleveland, serving for the Federation for the past 16 years. One of his many portfolios, Oren oversees the community security program in Cleveland, provides strategic guidance to that program, and is intimately involved in its operation development. Previously served 25 years in Israel's military defense and intelligence community, so welcome and thank you, Oren. Chuck Green serves as Director of Community Security for the Jewish Federation of Greater Kansas City. Chuck is a 30-year veteran of the United States Secret Service, serving his last post as Special Agent in charge of the Kansas City field office. Prior to service at the U.S. Secret Service, Chuck was also a police officer in Overland Park, Kansas, prior to joining the service. Liron Philippi joined the New York Community Security Initiative earlier this year, a joint initiative and project of UJ New York and NYJCRC as the Long Island Security Manager, responsible for overseeing Nassau and Suffolk counties under that security umbrella. Previously, Liron served within Israel's security agency, also known as Shin Bet, and as a senior security official for El Al Airlines. So Liron, thank you for being here today. And lastly, Stephanie Villegas serves as the Community Security Director for the Greater Miami Jewish Federation. In this capacity, Stephanie oversees and manages a security portfolio across a very diverse community across Miami-Dade County of over 150 organizations. She's a 22-year veteran of the FBI, specializing in weapons of mass destruction, training, and crisis management. So Stephanie, I want to kick off the panel and start with you. As I mentioned, Miami is a very diverse community, both geographically, but also demographically, across many denominations. How has your community been preparing for outdoor services? And are there any specific tips or observations you want to share in addition to what Rabbi Posey has started us with?
So good afternoon. Thank you for having me. Yes, to dovetail on exactly what Rabbi spoke about. So you mentioned Miami is very diverse. It's also, most of South Florida is very unique. Aside from being extremely diverse, we have been the hotbed, as you know, for COVID-19 cases, and then throw in hurricane season and 91-degree days, and the largest senior population in the United States, it becomes quite challenging. I think collectively, as a community, we're all gearing up for this unprecedented high holiday season. And for all of us, safety and security are going to have to go hand in hand. And those plans have to be revamped to manage this new paradigm. Just like reopening, though, I want to caution you, there is no one-size-fits-all plan. With outdoor services especially, and just saying we are going outdoors brings a whole new set of challenges. In an effort to do that, back in March, I started what we call a community security working group. And basically, that is an online security group for those responsible for security in their community. We meet weekly and we discuss security-related issues, just like outdoor services, other concerns, and then we also conduct training. We also have law enforcement on each and every meeting. They're able to provide intelligence to us, and then they weigh in on all of our plans. And right now, this week, outdoor services is what we discussed, and they weighed in on those plans as well. So this whole team approach, if you will, I really believe has made us stronger as a community because we have the ability to learn from one another. Some synagogues, as you all mentioned, have already been conducting in-person services. And from that, they've been able to share with us their best practices as well as their lessons learned. So we're not all making the same mistakes, if you will. And as we move to outdoor services, how does that landscape now look? So some are offering drive-in style services, while others are going to offer multiple outdoor services throughout the day. If you're one of those services that you're offering services that are going to be that drive-in style, if you will, like an old drive-in movie theater, I just caution you on this because what I'm noticing, at least in my community, is they're moving them to a different city. So you move it to a different city because that's where you could get the space that brings along its own challenges. Now you don't have the law enforcement connection that you may have had for your local synagogue. Now you need to reach out to that other local jurisdictions. It just brings a lot of different challenges, especially now you have people in a car. So what do we talk about and what do we offer? It's much along the lines of what you laid out as a strategy for considerations. I think you had the top 10 out there. We literally go through that list and we take those apart and apply with each different facility, what are their specific needs and how does that apply to them? So for South Florida, because of the landscape, it may include barriers, right? We don't have natural barriers, trees and things of that nature here as prevalent. But the barriers have to protect the congregants, but they also have to allow for an evacuation if need be. Does the plan include things like children? Are children going to be allowed to services? If so, is there restroom use? And how do you plan for that? Do you allow food or do you not allow food? Especially for some of these services where you're going to break fast. Do you have medical on site? And I think the rabbi touched on that. And that's a big one. And it's one of the bigger ones for South Florida because we're so concerned of heat exhaustion, especially among our elderly. And wearing a mask is challenging enough, but wearing a mask in 91-degree weather with 80% humidity brings a whole different set of challenges for us. So my biggest suggestion and takeaway is that we have to all remain flexible. You have to revisit that plan, and we really suggest you revisit that plan after each and every service and make any necessary changes then. So be adaptive, be flexible, and be willing to make changes as needed.
Thank you, Stephanie. Want to just pick up on that point about flexibility, and Oren, come to you and ask you a little bit about some of the advanced work Cleveland's done as far as working with law enforcement partners in the form of tabletop exercises, full-scale exercise, a lot of scenario-based planning. How has that work kind of kept flexibility, kept scenarios on the table, and informed how you guys are thinking about services, outdoor spaces this year? Your mute's on, sir.
Now I'm muted. So first of all, great being on the call and thank you for having me. So I will say a couple of words about partnership with law enforcement. A big part, a big anchor of our security approach is the partnership that we have with local law enforcement. And this partnership means that we meet regularly, we plan regularly, we train a lot regularly. I can't stress enough the importance of training. If in real estate you say that the three most important things is location, 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 security, it's training, 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 and more training. So all our synagogues have gone through trainings as a training routine that each synagogue has to go through every year. And part of this training is done with police, with law enforcement. The partnership with law enforcement, what it enables us is a couple of layers of security. First of all, we are able to have the local law enforcement from the different jurisdictions which we partner with provide no cost off-duty policemen and on-duty policemen to come and saturate the area where we are working. Some of them come with their cruisers. Some of the cruisers have license plate readers, and we ask local law enforcement if they have license plate readers in the cars to make sure that those cruisers are in our vicinity, because it's another layer of security. Another possibility, some law enforcement have mobile cameras that are controlled by the local dispatch. We in Cleveland, we have five of those. For the holidays, the police actually allocates them to us, and we locate them in all kinds of crucial points where we want the cameras to be, and they're monitored by the local dispatch. Another thing is, especially if you're having outdoor services, and you're going to have them on Friday and Saturday and maybe Sunday, and at night they are going to be open to anybody. See if law enforcement can come with a bomb dog to do a search before the service. It can be very helpful. So that's regarding what we recommend as part of the partnership with law enforcement, and later on I'll add some other points.
Thank you, Oren. Appreciate it. Chuck, want to turn to you, and given your long career in Secret Service, some of the best agents doing work on event security, protective details. Can you talk a little bit specifically about the role of the security committee and what they should be thinking about pre-event and also during the event, and how that plays into the bigger picture?
Absolutely, Pat. Thank you for having me on today, and thanks to SCAN for hosting this series. Very helpful for communities, especially mine, and we appreciate it. Since the start of 2000, for a lot of you and for me too, things have drastically changed on the security front. Things that we did last year won't necessarily work this year. And as a matter of fact, security directors and security committees are all looking at different ways to make security work in this COVID-19 atmosphere that we find ourselves in. So the question of what security directors should be doing or could be doing will vary depending upon what your different congregations and your different areas are experiencing. So the answers will be varied as well. You're likely to be having events either in person at your own facilities, but spread out and limited, or opting to hold, high holiday events offsite, and or the third option is a lot have seen are doing online events via Zoom, other video webinar services, things like that. So if you're holding events that are in your synagogues and on your properties, review last year's events and see what worked and what didn't. Obviously it's going to take more space if you're going to do this inside, just to keep people apart from each other. But those are some of the considerations that I won't get into COVID-19 too much here, but basic stuff that is more broad. Review your emergency action plans. And as many people said, including your medical emergency and your response training that you put forward to your greeters, volunteers, and your security staff. Things like defibrillator training, stop the bleed, basic first aid, Know who's on site. If you have doctors that are on site, possibly discuss with them in advance if they would be willing to help if you had an emergency. You need to confirm and familiarize your community's schedule of events. Many have numerous synagogues that are doing different things at different parts in the city. Nowadays, and we're involved in civil unrest issues and demonstrations, you want to make sure that we somewhat deconflict some of the events that we may be having with things that may be going on in the city around us. So coupled with talking with your local law enforcement to confirm what these events are, demonstrations, protest events, it can be helpful and hopefully avoid a problem. Meet with your volunteers, your ushers, and your greeters and discuss their roles and responsibilities in advance. And I would recommend that before these events, you actually walk through each site with those volunteers and security personnel. And Secret Service calls this like a site post assignment tour, where you actually take everyone around, show them and tell them, this is what we're looking for you to do. This is your piece of the puzzle. If you do this and everything gets together and gets reported in the way it's supposed to, we'll have a successful event. That way everybody knows what everybody else's assignment is. And in case that you have to make adjustments in your personnel later, there isn't any question as to what was told to that person. So everyone should hear that together, walk the whole site, and then put them back out to their assigned individual posts and their assignments. Have a prearranged way to communicate with everyone, whether that's two-way radios, cell phones, group text messages to everyone, and establish who the site security coordinator is. So they know exactly who should be making the call in the event that there's something that goes wrong. If you're planning an external site and you're thinking about taking stuff outside of your walls and your property, the most critical thing from doing hundreds of sites over the years, and not only from planning them and also supervising them, is in the site selection. You have the opportunity up front to not jump out into something that's very indefensible. Choosing a site that's easier to defend because of the way it's arranged or where it may geographically be placed, and things like topography, what are you around? Do you have high ground concerns? Your proximity to high traffic areas like highways and off-ramps and different things that may open up your site to other types of negative type of issues with gunshots, anything that could come in, and demonstration concerns in areas downtown or other places where we've seen demonstrations occur before. You want less vulnerabilities, ease of access, and egress. So many people believe when we go out and we get a wide open field that we're improving our security. The problem may also be that you have nowhere to go once you're out there. If you have concerns regarding an attack, or if you have concerns with weather, lightning, other types of things in public events on flat territory. And I'm in Kansas, so I can tell you it's pretty flat in most places here. So you got to watch out for the weather, tornadoes, other types of things. When you pick a site and it's in a building, use the building layout and your landscaping features if it's being held outside to enhance your perimeter control of your site, and decide, as a decider in making sure that that site is something that you want to go to. If it's not laid out the right way, go find another building. There may be some reasons why the congregation wants to go somewhere specific, but it's your job to talk them into something that's more secure, or at least as secure as what they're leaving. You need to establish, like people said before, if you're going outside, you need to know where you're headed to. Establish who is in command and control of the event. Are you paying for or renting this space? And does that come with some security built into that, whether it's at a park, a city, a facility, whatever? And also, do you need additional security to augment that security based on your event? So who can declare an emergency at your event? Is it the people that are actually running the facility, or do you need to get somebody to sign, some type of a complaint against a disruptive individual? All these things should be worked out in advance and talked about. Have the clergy speakers on the bema or on the stage, have they been talked to about how to handle disruptions that may occur? Briefed as to, hey, let's put this on hold for 5 minutes and let's clear the room. We'll get the situation taken care of, and then we'll come back. But those should be discussed with them in advance. You need to determine how to control your perimeter. I think we're going to talk about that probably a little more. And natural barriers, walls, water, sawhorses, police tape. There's a variety of different ways to do that. Use what's already there to your advantage. And mainly we're talking about people that follow the rules, not people that run across the pond and or swim towards you, jump over walls. Those are a whole different type of individual, and obviously it would be handled in a different way. So is your site in a public area? I know we've had Shabbat in the park, in the lot, all kinds of different forms of that. But in public parks where you have pedestrian walkways that meander through, it's a consideration as to what you can control and what you can't control. So talk to your local authorities about that. Ticketing your event is preferred as always, and it's a way to ensure that only guests are in attendance. Using staff greeters with a list of the ticketed people is recommended. It's a way to try to ensure that only the people that you want in your event are in your event. Know what law enforcement agency has jurisdiction over your site, and talk to them in advance. And if possible, meet with them at the site so you can actually show them. Pictures worth 1,000 words. So if you can tell them that this is where I'm planning to set this up, that up. Obviously, use of metal detectors, license plate readers, and cameras, that has been discussed here, are always an upgrade to your security, which really depends on perimeter security in the end. So, and lastly, you may be considering your online web-based services for your congregation. If so, there is a webinar coming up here in a couple of weeks, Cyber Preparedness for the High Holidays. I strongly recommend that you see that and take into account some of the recommendations that they'll make for you. So, thank you.
Thank you, Chuck. Appreciate your expertise. Liron, I want to turn to you. Obviously, New York poses very unique challenges: limited space, busy streets, a lot of activity going on these days, and a very large Jewish population that you guys are working with. You know, based on some of Chuck's comments on site selection, can you talk a little bit about the challenges with helping congregations identify, find, and secure space in more of I know you're responsible for a suburban environment, but some of your partners in a more urban environment across Manhattan.
So first, thank you all for being here. Thank you, Pat, for hosting that webinar. And I will first take this opportunity to wish you, your staff, your members, and all the participants Happy New Year and happy and safe holidays. So I cannot repeat what Chuck said. He emphasized enough the importance of choosing lower location. In New York City, it's more challenging, as you say. We are in lack of high, open spaces, but we are not in lack of rooftops. So what we will advise and what we are advising, and CSI has been working for the last months with synagogues all around the city to choose location, is first choose your location wisely, use rooftops if you can. There's many private Jewish schools with who use the rooftop as a playground, and that can be easily converted to a place of worship. And if you can, use a parking lot, an open parking lot. But if there are no other alternatives, then you really have to place the tent on the street. And when placing a tent in front of your facility on the street, the city does allow us to block the street during service, but you cannot block the street for 3 days. Okay, so it's you really have to take the necessary precautions to face those threats as ramming, stabbing, using of firearms, and place the security measures such as was said early, concealment, maybe use cars, or even we have just visited a place in Westchester, my colleague Bill Hayes and me, and we noticed that this school has empty school buses. And we suggest them to use them to close the perimeter and actually allow you to have concealment and also some kind of a cover. But remember that you still have to keep those places ventilated, of course. So this is in a case of we really don't have choice, and we really have to put the tent on the street. Doing that, also we are facing a challenge of, in New York City, you cannot block the street completely. You have to leave a lane for emergency vehicles, and you have to keep that in mind as well. I want to address another issue in that subject. And when you're making the plan, and Chuck touched it in briefly, and you think about your emergency plans, it's totally different than what you used to have before inside of your facility, and you have to make those adjustments. So some ideas that we have been that we've seen and we can think about. So one of the synagogue in Manhattan actually chose the place, and he placed his tent next to Central Park, but he placed it, sides of the parks have walls. So he uses the wall as an anchor and also a barricade. This is if you have some kind of facility like that. Some facilities in the past used hay stacks as concealment, and also as a barrier. And this is a very cheap, temporary materials that you can place to provide those both concealment and cover in case of emergency. That's it.
Thank you, Liron. I want to turn to a couple of questions from our participants before continuing the conversation. And I'll really now just kind of open it up to whoever would like to answer. One of the questions relates to access control and kind of crowd control as people enter. What suggestions might you offer as it relates to checking congregant IDs without creating a backup and long lines as people enter whatever space it is that we're trying to secure?
I'll suggest two things. First of all, if people register to an outside event or they have their tickets, if the tickets have a name or something like this, have people present them when they come, or a return RSVP from a synagogue. That's the first thing. Second thing, make sure that you have volunteers who know the congregant. If you have policemen at the choke points, have a group of volunteers stand with the policemen and identify members of the congregation.
Thank you, Ori. Any other comments on that before we move to the next question?
I will just add to that since we're talking about outdoor services, one of the threats we are facing is people coming into those places. But what I suggest to do is widen your perimeter. In many places, we cannot create those barriers. I wish we could. The city doesn't allow you to put blockades everywhere or barriers everywhere, or because of city rules. And so if you are widening your perimeter and you put, like Oren just suggested, those volunteers in choke points on the places that you go, people coming out of the subway, you can identify in early stages the individuals that maybe have some kind of suspicious signs, and then you have a buffer to give alert to the people which inside the tent, or even, like Oren said, get the police to them. So you have to create that buffer zone and widen your perimeter using those volunteers.
Thank you both. We talk very routinely about the engagement of law enforcement in a security detail capacity for services. One of the questions is, I know this is very site specific, municipal specific, so maybe we get a couple comments from you all as it relates to your processes. But one of the questions is, how do we go about identifying and securing either off-duty law enforcement? So let's start with law enforcement. So I know it's different than guard forces, but how do we go about doing that, to have off-duty law enforcement be part of that security detail, within our communities? Chuck, Stephanie, you want to start from the law enforcement perspective?
Sure. So if you don't already have that relationship with your law enforcement, I strongly encourage you to start that. You could always backtrack and go through your federation and ask who a law enforcement contact would be in that. And then you'd get in touch with their off-duty detail coordinator to schedule that. And it's very easy and it's very commonly used.
Yeah, Pat, we use both contract armed guards and also off-duty police officers in a varying arrangement in terms of protecting not only our campus, but also special events. So those special events, again, are briefed differently in advance as to what the police officers will be doing and what the private security people will be doing. And as we just mentioned, what the volunteer staff will be doing. You don't want your security people tied up and checking names off of a list while they're supposed to be watching other things. And you don't want to be misdirected to do things or find yourself in a way that you can't do your security job properly. And that's really where that understanding of whose responsibility is what prior to the event going on pays off in dividends.
And I think to dovetail on that, having the congregants register, pre-register, and you can go through and vet those names is going to make all the difference in the world this year, because you don't want them standing out there in the middle of traffic, in the middle of roadways, in the elements. So if you can encourage them to go ahead and pre-register, that's going to be your best way. We do have one shul that has mainly elderly congregants. They're not very tech savvy, so they've been calling in to a secretary, and the secretary's been putting them onto a list. So I highly encourage that. And then if someone's coming as a visitor, they come with that congregant so they can be identified.
Thanks, all. We're going to try to squeeze in a couple more questions that are coming in. So this is going to kind of flip the conversation we just had. We recognize the importance of law enforcement being involved, but also we're in a very dynamic environment between civil disorder, civil unrest, the pandemic, just general strain on law enforcement. One of the comments from one of the participants is having really delayed response times or inability of law enforcement to really be part of, our planning process as much as they have been in past years. How do we think about kind of rejiggering our EOP plans or response plans and kind of thinking through that when we may not be able to either deploy, obviously 911, hopefully we have a better response, but not being able to deploy or lean on law enforcement as frequently or as much as we did in the past, kind of throughout the process. I don't know who wants to start on that, so I'll leave it open to you all. Go ahead, sir.
First of all, I will plug into what Chuck said. It's all about coordinating. You have to coordinate with your local precinct and make sure that they're allocating, they know your service plan, they know your schedule, they know where the location of your tent, and they know your emergency plan. And they have to plug into that and be coordinated. And I trust, at least in New York, the police, that they will do they're doing. We see that. We have a commissioner going online before the holidays and talking about those things and promising that they will allocate the right measures and manpower to be prepared for those scenarios. But it's all about coordination.
And Pat, I would follow with that in some of these situations, if local law enforcement is telling you that they won't be able to respond due to some kind of a public emergency, it's time to start looking at why you're having that event in the first place. Time to think about maybe, canceling it, putting it off, and going somewhere else. Because if you can't secure it and you don't have any backup with your local law enforcement, and or state, federal, whoever happens to be working in there. Yeah, you can't go it alone.
Right, we're making a decision to go virtual if the environment requires that. So we have about time for one more quick question, and before I'm going to ask Dina to kind of close out and just do a reminder for follow on and next steps as far as additional webinars. Oren, want to turn to you. We haven't covered this topic yet, so I just want to kind of give you the last word. Can you share within 2 minutes? I know that's a lot to cover in 2 minutes. But just really what you're hearing, what you're seeing, or what emergent threats we could expect given the current environment as we move into the holiday season.
Look, first of all, I can talk about Cleveland. Right now we don't have any known threat that we know about. But the way we build our security, the whole security ideology, is that we're building our system to a situation where we don't have intelligence. And by the way, if you see most of the attacks that happen on Jewish institutions and on non-Jewish institutions, even if there was information, it wasn't intelligence. I mean, it wasn't operational intelligence. So I think the best way to get ready is to get ready to a situation of unknown. But I can say that we are all the time ready for and watching for extreme right, extreme left, and also extreme Muslims. That's the best I can say now. From a point of view of state terror, that's in the end, that's a responsibility of FBI, CIA, and other agencies to be on top of that. So I'm not going to say here that we have the ability right now to pinpoint. Sometimes we do get intelligence, and we have had some success. And I can say that in the last 3 months, we had some good intelligence about neo-Nazi organizations, and we were able to deal with it and bring people to arrest. But that's the only proof we have that something was developing.
Thank you. And I just want to make one comment to that. So sorry, we're running short on time, so we'll continue the conversation offline. But I just want to thank everyone for participating, lending your time and expertise. Of course, this ongoing collective effort. To the last point on information sharing and intelligence, I urge you, as you all do, to continue two-way information sharing with SCN, and we will continue to push on information we hear so we can all kind of work together collaboratively. Our team is in the final throes of developing out a joint threat assessment product, which will come out in advance of the holidays to kind of help inform some of the planning. But again, thank you for all the work you continue to do. Thank you to our presenters and panelists today for participating. You all did a great job, and I want to turn it back to Dina to close us out and talk about next webinars. Dina?
Great, thanks so much. Thank you again to all of our panelists and our attendees. We will be following up with recording of the webinar along with related resources to all registrants. So please be on the lookout for that. And as Pat mentioned, you can always reach out to SCN, your local security director, or whomever in your area, but SCN is here to support you. So we're looking forward to being in touch and hopefully seeing everyone on next week's webinar related to personal safety and security preparedness. You'll receive that registration link. You can either find it in the chat or in your follow-up email you'll receive. And then we will also be re-hosting our cyber preparedness webinar following week on the 16th, just prior to the start of the Chagim, for last minute preparations around our high holidays observances and celebrations. Thank you again for everyone joining today. Take care.
Thank you.